Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this great conversation. I'm Jennifer Ferrari, proud CEO of the Education Research and Development Institute, and I'm really excited to be here with some of my esteemed colleagues from across the United States who will introduce themselves in time. I also would like to share that there are many people within the ERDI community out in the audience, and I just wanted to recognize you and say thanks so much for helping us do this work. In essence, we bring leaders from across the United States together from both the industry side as well as from the school district side to tackle some of the biggest problems of practice facing public education in our country. The top two problems of practice that we've been recently facing are no surprise. It's leading for equity and also making sure that we have robust pipelines and workforce development programs in order to ensure that there are proper teachers and leaders in the seats of American schools. So today, we are going to be jumping right in, again, talking about these two topics in earnest, and I'd like to just start with Yolanda. If you wouldn't mind, to help frame this conversation, please define what it actually means to lead for equity based on the definition we set as a group, and explain why this is a really important part of the factoring in with regard to the pipeline.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, everyone. From here, you guys look fantastic. Just wanted to say that. I had to get that out. Once again, my name is Yolanda Stanislaus. I serve as the director in the Department of Professional Growth Systems in Montgomery County Public Schools. It's the largest school system in Maryland and quite diverse, and it's grown that way. And I say that to say our journey around equity has been a challenge at times, but one thing that I really love about the district is, and our leaders, they're not afraid to face it head on. When we think about pipeline work and we think about retention, a lot of what I do in my department is based on what does the onboarding experience look like for our teachers coming in? Or what is the experience once they, not just teachers, support professionals and leaders, what's their experience once they're in the space? Do they feel like they can grow? So we really, a few years ago in the district, we did some reimagining work where we really started to look at the life cycle of employees from the point where we're saying, hey, we really want you to be a part of our district through what does your onboarding experience look like, through are we providing enough and differentiated professional learning opportunities so that we're able to retain them at higher rates? But before we can do that, right, that's really technical. And we knew that this work is not technical work. It's adaptive work because we're dealing with whole human beings. So our approach was to really, we talked about this earlier, but two things: looking through the window and then looking in the mirror. What does that really mean if you're a district that's dedicated to anti-racist work? So looking out the window for us was an opportunity for us to do a full anti-racist audit in our district. We were out there, we were getting the voice data from families, from everyone who wanted to share. And that's really great, right? And we've all done that as leaders and educators. But the work really started with us taking a look in the mirror. Right? When we think about like our cycle of socialization, what got all of us here to this spot? What were some of the experiences that you had growing up that may have added to certain biases that you may carry? And if that's the case, doing this kind of equity work forces and pushes you to ask those hard questions. It's not a fun journey, but it's a journey because we know that we want the best outcome, an authentic outcome, an adaptive outcome for the individuals we serve. So as a department and as a system, we're really looking through the cycle of socialization, what got us to the point where we are now, and what are some of the tenets that we need to put in place in order to liberate our approaches. Are we saying, yeah, we really want to do this equity work, and we've done our bias training, and I've gone here and there, and I've read, all the books I need. But then when we really start saying, what does the policy look like? Right? Is there a policy in place that ensures that we are not leading through a racist lens or a white supremacist culture? And if we are, what do we need to do to unpack that policy so that it better meets the needs of Black and brown children and staff? We know that I think it's 3% of Black men are teachers. Why? You know, so this anti-racist audit that we did in the system and the ongoing commitment really pushes on us to be vulnerable and to ask those questions even when it's uncomfortable. And when we work with our staff, we say that. We let them know it's not going to be comfortable all the time. And there are going to be times where you feel like, you know, I don't feel closure here. And that's okay too, because that's a part of the process. So, you know, that's kind of how we entered the journey, just really looking at ourselves being, you know, reflective on our own practice, but then also looking at policies that continue to help shape a racist practice, or what do we do differently to embrace an anti-racist approach to our pipeline work and to meeting the needs of our diverse learners, diverse employees and all employees, because we know that if we're doing that, they're better able to meet the needs of the students that we serve. So it's always going right back to the students, and I think if you keep that in the forefront, it helps people push through that process a bit.
Thank you. That does take courage. We hear horror stories across the country right now of people who are leading for equity coming under great fire, and that's really challenging. So is there anyone from the group that can potentially, or can you share some of the words of wisdom about how to combat that? And how did your system continue to do this work despite the challenging part of that work?
We do just that, and we tell them. We're explicit, right? That, you know, we come into agreement with one another when we're on the journey together. We read a lot as well. We undergird what we're doing, not just with our feelings, but with what the research is saying. We just did, like I said, this whole audit that took a year, and there were many domains that came from that. These are the voices of the people, and very often we make decisions without including the voices of the individuals these decisions are going to impact. So I think it's very important that you continue to ensure, when you're thinking about equity work starts with who's at the table, who's there. Right? Do you have representation that will be the voice of that group? And are you listening twice as much as you are talking, so that you can really hear what individuals need in order to move themselves, move the work, and what they need from us as a district?
Thank you. Steve, at our symposium, we talked a lot about the teacher shortage and the pipeline issue that we're having across the country. And you actually challenged the group in the beginning, if you remember, to say how many of you have children, and people raised their hand. You said, how many of you would encourage your children to go into teaching? It's a big question, and it's one that we have to reconcile pretty quick. I'd like for you to talk about the national shortage, and is this precise, is this accurate? What is the perception, what is the shortage? And just give us a little bit of your perception of that issue from the collegiate standpoint.
Welcome, everyone. Good to see you here. Steve Murley. I'm at the University of Iowa right now, but I just came out of 30 years in public ed, the last 18 as superintendent in 3 different urban districts. I think when you look at the scope of the problem, it's really important to understand the framework. So every day across the country, there are 3.5 million classrooms that need a teacher in front of them. And last October, 2 months into the school year, 45% of the schools in the United States had at least one classroom that did not have a full-time certified teacher. Okay? But with that said, you have to look at the numbers and unpack them, because there are actually more teachers, more certified teachers in the United States now than there were before the pandemic, and there are fewer kids in our classrooms than before the pandemic. We have a lot of kids that have gone missing. So that math doesn't add up, right? Well, you have to look at where those shortages are. Special ed, science, math, so hard to fill. But then when you go back to the lens that Yolanda just shared with us, which schools are facing the greatest shortages? Those are the schools that have high poverty populations and high minority populations. And then when you think about some of the things that she talked about us needing to challenge our staff to do and our communities to do to have these difficult conversations, if you look across the country, you look at the PDK poll and some others out there, the esteem for public educators is not very high right now. We do not hold them in high regard. It is not a profession, as Jen just shared, that we may want to encourage our kids to go into, and so we shouldn't necessarily be surprised that we're finding this. I think one of the other things that's been a challenge is we've seen a lot of people who have chosen to step away during the pandemic or shortly thereafter. They might have stayed in the profession another 3, 5, 10 years. And the struggle of the pandemic or some of the culture wars that we've been facing in our schools in the last 3 or 4 years have driven them out of the classroom. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to make sure that we are encouraging kids to go into education. We need to make sure that we are focused on the regard and the esteem that we hold educators in. And then we have to figure out how to incentivize our educators to choose the right schools and the right classrooms so that next October we don't find 45% of our schools with at least one vacancy filled by a long-term sub or somebody else who's provisionally certified.
Thank you very much. So let's bring the two issues together. Leading for equity is paramount, and it's a given. And the teacher shortage is real, which we'll talk more about throughout this conversation. Scott, on the ground, I'd like for you to talk about your leadership in distinctive schools, but I want to remind us that at the last symposium, actually Dr. Barron Davis, who's right there in the audience, we came into the symposium thinking it was going to be about recruitment, and we quickly learned that the best recruitment strategy is actually a great retention strategy. And so, Scott, I was hoping you could talk about some of the work that you've been leading and share some of your knowledge and insights.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good afternoon. Scott Frauenheim, CEO of Distinctive Schools. Really excited to be here and grateful for the ERDI partnership alongside all of these colleagues. The symposium where we all came together to start to ideate on some of this work was definitely inspiring to me. Brought it back to our team, some of our team in the room today, and super excited about the journey that we've been on at Distinctive Schools, and I'll call it a journey over and over again because we've remembered and we've instilled in ourselves that it is a journey. The equity work, the talent work, the leadership work, and we can never stop learning and we can never stop growing. At this symposium, we all came together, we divided and conquered, and we came up with lots of different solutions and strategies and really ways to activate some of the responses to what we're all seeing in relation to the shortage and to the culture wars across the country that's creating a major divide. We know many leaders in this room who are really struggling with some of those culture wars to move the work. The values are there, but the beliefs are there, but the lack of support sometimes is not there from external partners, from boards, and from other related partners trying to stop the equity work. So far as many leaders coming together to say, we are going to be unapologetic about doing this equity work, but we are going to call it belonging because nobody can debate me on the word belonging. And if they do, I dare them to try as the sentiment coming out of the symposium. And so we want to honor that in the space that, in some ways, some folks are really struggling with their values-aligned leadership in this area and where we all, as a system, need to continue to push. Barron, I think, had us repeat to him when he was speaking to us about asking us the question, what is your best recruitment strategy? And we all repeated back, retention is our best recruitment strategy right now in knowing the world of education and where we are at. As we think about this work, we worked really closely with Dr. Campbell. Dr. Tammy Campbell is an incredible partner to so many of us and has been really leading the work around belonging, but also really co-constructing what belonging and equity means in your district, in your network, or in your school. And she really challenged us, I think, I'll speak for myself, but how can we bring folks on? How can we onboard them? How can we get them ready for an experience in our schools if we are so fast to go quickly hire and get teachers in classrooms without really co-constructing and defining what culture and equity means in our system, in our school, in our personal beliefs and values. And so onboarding was definitely a big topic of that conversation to make sure we are slowing down and we are remembering the importance of what it means to be, what it means to operate in our schools, what it means to feel belonging as part of these schools, and especially starting with our educators and staff. From there, as Jen said, we had some critical levers and some critical areas of focus. Ours were onboarding. What is the experience? Who owns it? How is equity driven into the first day of onboarding for every single staff member? And truly defining the work in that system. College, university, and other talent partnerships. While it sounds simple post-pandemic, we have to really reinvigorate some of those relationships and get higher ed really focused on the struggles and the challenges happening in our classrooms. And Steve outlined it, but those of you that are in a school or in a classroom or in a system right now, I think you can all attest to the feelings and the emotions and the baggage and the weight of what the shortage is doing to our kids every single day. Recruitment strategies and really thinking outside the box, our compensation and investment work back to creating compensation that is equitable for our staff to want to be with us, including leaders and educators of color, leaders and educators of diverse backgrounds, and making sure we've got the representation in our schools through investment. Dismantling and building anti-racist environments, and again, defining what that means, not just saying it, but truly defining it with folks having a voice at the table. And then elevating voice. Back to what Yolanda said, culture and retention, diversity, equity, and inclusion, really getting folks around the table to help you co-construct that with the support of leaders. And then lastly, thinking about what does next year look like? What does the year after that look like? What does career succession planning look like? And really spent a lot of time on those main topics as we came together and built a lot of action steps out of those that I'm sure Jen would be willing to share with the room and folks. I think a first critical lever we all talked about is what Yolanda said. You have to audit what's going on. So many leaders came into that space and said, we're great. Everything's great. Everything's great. We just need to get teachers in the rooms, and we need to get kids in front of really strong teachers. And anyone that has gone through an audit in the last 2 years, I think the definition of cold buckets of water on leaders' faces, of real awareness of what's really happening, and the bias and the microaggressions and the racism that's ever present from day to day, minute to minute. And if we don't acknowledge that and be unapologetic about stopping it and co-constructing it, we are not going to fix this quickly.
Thanks, Scott. We've talked a lot about this idea of moving from solo missions to coalitions. We have to band together in this work so that we've got safety nets around us. Before going into a more global perspective, I want to come back to Steve for just a minute. From your higher ed perspective, but then also having years of superintendent experience, can you talk to us a little bit more about what the actual challenges are, the most significant kind of barriers to moving in this direction?
Absolutely. When you think about what was just shared, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that for most teachers, it's a very isolating profession in the sense that they spend most of their time in the classroom with kids. And right now, with the pressure that they're facing, wondering about what they're teaching, who's looking at it, how are they looking at it, what are the outcomes if they find something in there that's unacceptable, there's a lot of weight on teachers, and so we need to figure out how to bring them out of isolation. That's one of the key factors in that retention issue when you look at the 5-year mark and the number of teachers that choose to leave the profession at or before that 5-year mark. The professional isolation, the lack of support, going back to what Yolanda said, and you think about the efficacy of leadership, right? What do the leaders in their buildings look like? What do the leaders in their districts look like? What are they saying? How are they leading? How are they protecting the teachers in the classroom from some of these winds that are buffeting us across the country when it comes to education? And I think another thing that we're struggling with too, and we have to acknowledge this, is coming out of the pandemic, the academic struggles that kids have faced. I hate deficit language, and so the idea of learning loss really, I struggle with that as a term, but I haven't found anything that's better than that yet, so if somebody has something, you can share it with me later. But knowing that we have so many kids that struggled during the pandemic and are now trying to get back on grade level, many teachers feel like they're being asked to do more than they've ever been asked to do before with less support than they've ever had before. And if we can't figure out how to solve that problem amidst some of the challenges that are going on in communities right now and the pressure that boards and administrators are under, we're going to have an enormous problem because 2018 was a turning point. We see more students in programs seeking certification now, but between 2010 2018 across the country, the number of people going into education prep programs declined every year. So for us, we always wind up harvesting those pluses or minuses 4 or 5 years later. We're hitting that right now. So there are fewer and fewer kids that are, young adults that are coming out of higher ed ready to teach.
Thanks. Now, Adam, take us to the balcony level and help us understand what you think the most important role a leader should play in this work, and what should they do for the next 3 to 5 years? And before you actually answer, I have to give a shout out to all of you in the room that don't know, Dr. Adam Clark was just named the California Superintendent of the Year, so congratulations.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm the superintendent of the Mount Diablo Unified School District in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm also the incoming president of the California Association of African American Superintendents and Administrators. And so this work is extremely real, and I've really gained a great insight at attending the ERDI Institutes and talking about equity and some of the challenges that we see at the national level. And what I did was I brought that lens back home to my district and really took a close look at how we are recruiting, hiring, and onboarding and maintaining our diverse workforce. It's one thing to put in a mission statement that we're going to diversify our workforce to reflect our students, but actually peeling back the onion in that and seeing actually what takes place in the day-to-day. So a few things that I'd like to share with you, that I found extremely interesting in really following this work was even just the application process. Sometimes as educational leaders and whatever role you have in your district, you have to look at these applications and make sure that you're getting diverse people in the room just to be able to share their experiences and their stories and give them equal opportunities to interview. And then once we place them in a position, we have to understand that they may be the only at a particular school. And you can fill in the blank with that. And so as they go through the years, oftentimes these educators are met with challenges. Could be parent complaints. We have a lot of emerging bilingual leaders in our district, and so sometimes there may be a slight bit of a language barrier. And so when folks come in to address that or to complain about that or show concern about that, we have to put that lens of equity back on, and we have to say, okay, our workforce and how we communicate and how we do our day-to-day practices is not the same cookie cutter that we've always done. It's gonna look different, sound different, it's going to be different, and we have to be okay with that. And then as the year goes on, how are we mentoring and supporting our diverse educators? Are we just putting them in regular professional development as we do all of our educators, or are we looking for some other opportunities? This is the opportunity to be bold and to take those actions and to bring those actions back to our mission statements. All means all. I know you all have a mission statement. You all have vision statements within your districts or your organizations. And how are we bringing those actions back to that mission statement? Lastly, as we're closing in on the year, as we're closing in on the end of the school year, this is the time of year when we start making decisions on who's going to stick around and who's not. And oftentimes, when you're in those conversations and you're hearing about the educators that we spent all this time recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, and then having them, work in our systems for a year, now all of a sudden there may be a conversation because they don't fit in as nicely as some of our other educators that we may want to do away with them or ask them to find other employment. So this again is when those educational leaders have to step in and ask questions. Well, whose perception is that, or who says this person can't teach, or who says this principal can't lead, or those types of things. So it's real important to tie those actions back to those mission statements and to be intentional with that particular work in terms of leading for equity. And as my colleagues have shared, this work is not easy. When you start getting in a room with folks and talking about implicit bias or talking about systemic racism or talking about being an anti-racist and those types of things, it really stirs a lot of emotions from both sides of the aisle, and it really takes that leadership to be able to bring that together and to understand, hey, we're not going to come to a conclusion on this, but just talking about this will get us, moving down the road further than not talking about it, or just ignoring the situation or thinking this too shall pass. So again, we have to be intentional, we have to think outside the box, and we have to get involved. And you all are at this conference. You're here to expand your mind and expand those experiences and increase your connections. We got to put this back to work when we get back into our organizations and our communities.
Thanks so much, Adam. So the name of the game is coherence, right? Making sure that there are systems that support this work through and through. Just out of curiosity, how many people in the room are actually educators or building leaders, district leaders? How many of you are solution providers? Nonprofits? Fantastic. This is an opportunity for us now to share some ways that you might be able to support the field. And I'm going to invite each of you to be very frank and pull no punches, as you would say. These people are under fire every single day. Yeah, you can hear it in their voices. I think sometimes people are only one beat away from tears at times because it's just that hard right now. And so I'm going to invite you right now to give wisdom to the group on ways that particularly people from the private sector, from the nonprofits, from the non-educators, how they can actually help us in this journey right now. And I'm going to ask you to just really let it flow. Go ahead, Scott.
So, a lot of us, I don't know many of you in the room, but having these conversations, but we're talking about the country divided right now. And how do we reclaim the narrative of the joy and the inspiration and the fun of this work? And as we think about the talent pipeline and we think about retention and we think about investing in the people that have been deeply committed to us and loyal to us, while also diversifying our school districts and networks, not just to diversify our school districts and networks, but to bring representation and to bring access and exposure to our students, especially those of us that serve historically marginalized, underserved communities. And we want to make sure that we are doing all of that while reclaiming the narrative on education. And so I think it's important for us, back to the coalition movement, to look out and look through the window and also identify partners in the space. There's grow your own opportunities across the country bubbling up. They're so overwhelming to many of us education leaders because there's so many different pathways, and thinking about the ways that we invest in teachers to even go through those opportunities or to have access to those opportunities. And I also think elevating voice. If we can get educators excited about designing again, I think we're nervous too, because we're nervous to add one more thing to their plate. But I think if we continue to innovate and design with our folks and to help design what the future looks like, I think it could be really awesome. One of the superintendents in the room at this symposium was talking about giving letters of intent to seniors graduating his high school programs who would go do 4 years of college and university and come back and teach in the local community school that he was running and leading as a superintendent. I thought, that is a big idea. That is cool. And how do we get back to the big ideas from pre-pandemic that so many of us were activating on and moving on, and not let the country divide and the anger across the country stop us from doing what kids are watching us in our eyeballs and expecting us to do every single day?
Okay, two things. I think it's okay to have a safe to fail experiment, right? I think if you're really going to embark on any level of journey regarding, I'm looking at this data. I see that for us, we're looking at retention rates for teachers of color. And, it pushed us to say, it's not their issue, it's our issue. So what do we need to do differently? So we're really looking at some new opportunities to ensure that we are being reflective, we are open to our own biases, and that we're recognizing those biases when they come up. The other, with our solution providers, you do such a wonderful job with supporting schools, and you talked about in marginalized communities. I think it's really important that when we go to your website, that you also have a diverse group of staff who also represent your company and the work that you do, even if it's adjuncts. I'm not sure how you would do that, right? But I think it's important that if your goal is to support marginalized schools, communities, students, that you kind of put your money where your mouth is and also diversify your own workforce.
All right, so Jen, you just have to reel me in if I go too big here. So, and then too big in the go big or go home. In any given community, only 30% of the households have a child who comes home from school and tells them what happened in the classroom. 70% have a memory of school, themselves or their kids, 3 years, 5 years, 10, 20 years ago. there's a lot of passivity out there right now. And if you listen to what Adam said, we've got to flip into an active mode. I want those who no longer have kids in school to understand that public education, private education, charter education, it's all education. It's all building the future. If we don't invest in these kids today, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we aren't going to be able to fix that. And the people that are sitting on the sidelines and letting these education wars go on and saying that's not my problem, it's all of our problem. So why aren't we in the middle of the NBA finals seeing public service announcements talking about how awesome teachers are? Why aren't others who maybe don't have kids in school anymore, why aren't they standing up publicly for educators? So if we don't get to the point where we're figuring out how to increase the esteem the teachers have, the regard that we hold them in, if we're not figuring out how to protect them in the classroom where they are working on helping kids explore academic freedom and curiosity and all those other things that we know lead to positive outcomes, we aren't going to win the recruitment battle because young adults are going to choose other professions. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to get the word out to those who see education as somebody else's problem and have them recognize that it's our problem and that we have to collectively come together to elevate that voice and to really get everyone in the game.
So just a couple points I want to make here is, first of all, there are educators who want to go into this field and work in impoverished and diverse communities. However, when they get there, our system has a way of enacting survival of the fittest, right? And a lot of them don't feel valued, don't get the support that they need, and so they end up leaving the profession. However, when I really think about leading for equity, what I think about is like within my own district. I cover 7 different cities in our district, and I have the extreme wealth to the extreme poverty. And many products are pitched to me, and I would like for the folks who are creating products or have that, are in that space, to make sure that your products don't just work when all the conditions line up perfectly, right? So again, online learning is a great thing, but if you're working in schools where there's spotty internet and there's things to that nature, or there's a issue with keeping devices safe, from theft or from damage, or when there's high turnover in particular schools, a lot of products, they want you to give a whole day of PD when you only have a day before school starts for PD. And yet you're gonna spend a whole day of that, and that's the only way that this product will be able to work through fidelity. So again, we have to put a lens on of know that we're addressing a wide diversity of people, educational diversity, financial diversity, racial diversity, folks who are recent immigrants to this country, and a one-size-fits-all approach will not do that. And we will truly reach educational equity when in every single classroom, students are exposed to high-quality instruction by a caring adult that really has the student's best interests in mind.
Jen, I have one more thought here that we talked about that you just sparked that everyone got really excited about, and it was a big aha for a lot of us, I think, there at the symposium, was every single leader in every single district and every single school, in order to walk the equity talk, has to start to take ownership and has to see a direct correlation of their ownership on what retention and equity look like in our schools and our districts and our network. It's not the talent department that's going to solve it for us. It's not the performance management department. It's not a single principal. Teachers have a lot of options right now. They have choices in front of them, probably 30 a day on where they can go. Folks are leaving for tutoring and working from home, and that's great. But we need really strong teachers in our classrooms. And so reminding as a system, as a school, as a district, every single person, and I think coalescing around that as you're co-constructing, that we all own retention. Proud of our team, we're doing stay conversations. So every single employee in the organization gets a stay conversation. We want you here, we believe in you, we value you, we're excited about your growth. By the way, what's your 5-year plan look like? Where do you see yourself growing? Those retention strategies, though, cannot be done by one principal. Teachers are following their leaders, they're following their instructional coaches, they're following their deans, they're following their assistant principals. And so co-constructing around that idea of we all own this, I think is going to be really important versus just a superintendent or just a principal.
And I just echo what Scott said and remind everybody that when that leader, whether it's a building leader, district leader, or central office leader, steps up and takes that challenge and is willing to undertake that really difficult leadership, we have to figure out how to protect them, right? We have to make sure that they're not out there by themselves trying to defend what's going on in their classrooms or what's going on in their district. Too often right now, you see somebody who comes under fire and everyone backs away and leaves that person standing alone in the spotlight. We can't do that, because if that's what happens, we're going to slowly erode the willingness that people have to challenge some of these issues and really go hard. And if that doesn't happen, you're going to see a continuing erosion of the respect for educators and a lack of motivation for people in the classroom to continue.
And lastly, I just want to just say it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just the boards or the superintendent or the principal. It really is everybody. And if we're sticking to our mission and vision, then it's very obvious of the work that we need to do. And so let's continue to bring that coherence in, continue to focus on that mission and vision, collaborate and support one another so that we can reach each and every child that walks through our doors.
So finally, just thinking about the life cycle of your employee. What does it look like when you are going out to recruit? What does it look like when you actually get them into your system? Their onboarding experience, professional learning, and not just for the first few years, but over the lifetime of their journey with your district. And ultimately that retention component, leading to that retention component. So really just reflecting on those 3 top areas. How is it working in your system currently? Is it working in your system? And if not, what are some things that you can come together with a cross-collaborative body of stakeholders to take a deeper dive into it to see what are some things that are working, where's our ideal state, and really conducting a true gap analysis so that you can create goals and put some very specific structures in place that will enhance opportunities for employees when they come into your system.
Thanks. We are just at about time here, and I wanted to take a moment to publicly thank each of you for the work that you do each and every day on behalf of our children in this country. I'd like to thank all the educators in the room for the grind and the work that you lead in your work every single day. We see you, we thank you, we believe in you, and we are here to support you. We need to continue this work together. So thank you on behalf of this entire team, and have a wonderful rest of the conference. We have a great partner up here, Lisa Schmucke. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Schmucke. I'm the founder of EdWeb and had the pleasure to help recruit some of these folks to come today. We have some resources just if you'd like links to more of the work that they've done. We'll pass these around, but want to make sure you get a hold of this. So thank you guys.
Shout out to EdWeb, 15 years old. Thank you, Lisa. Have a great afternoon.